welcome back to the Hearthstone Global Games, and a very warm welcome to everyone that have joined us from the card reveal stream that just ended a little while back. This is Derek Brown, I'm Falcone, and we are going to get straight into the next elimination match. Turkey are out of the Hearthstone Global Games, and next up, Mexico or Austria will be joining them as their current scores are 0 and 2 in the Swiss.
That's exactly right. For those of you who maybe weren't watching the last series because, you know, like us, you were watching the card reveal stream.
Don't tell them that!
I mean, how could you miss it? There were some pretty cool cards revealed. But from what I hear from the other casters, Gaskin and Lorinda, it seemed like there was some pretty suspicious plays made by Turkey, not necessarily up to the standard that you need to be in the global games if you are going to stay in. And thus, because of that, they were eliminated by the ruthless United States. But coming up in this particular series, we're going to take a look at the games that we've got coming up.
Yeah, let's take a look at the teams representing Austria and Mexico. There we go. Fatio, Sebastian Joe, Zandi, and Krumet from Austria versus Yannis, Aridor, Empanizado, and Kalitas representing Mexico. Now, these are two teams that did really well in the Hearthstone Global Games last year, both getting through to the second phase of the competition. Mexico even made it through to the single elimination part of the bracket, which was a great performance. However, the teams have shifted a little bit as Hearthstone Global Games has shifted itself into a more competitive focus. And these are not the teams they were before. They should be stronger teams. Teams with more HCT points, but I guess with more competition, it's just harder all round.
It is indeed. And it's always sad to see teams like this that did so well last year doing so poorly this time around. Whereas, you know, sometimes you have players like, well, the winners from last year, the Czech Republic, also putting up a fantastic performance this time around. But like you said, with the shake-up in rosters, the transition from content creators over to HCT point system, it has clearly not worked out all too well for both of these teams. But having said that, as we will be taking a look now at the bans in this particular series, this is not the end of the road for one of these teams. It's not necessarily over for them.
No, one of these teams is going to be going through and still in there with a shot, like the United States, in there with a shot to go through to the next phase of the tournament. As we see Pixen banned, Shadowwalk Shaman, and Druid banned outright, which is pretty standard nowadays in the Hearthstone Global Games. Final pick also interests me. Odd Paladin on one side, Druid on the other. Now that one is a surprise, as Austria's Druid, I believe, is a big Druid.
It is indeed a big Druid. It's interesting that it ended up bottom of the ladder in terms of their picks for it. It's, as like you said, it's almost always the first deck banned or chosen, as we see from Mexico. It was the first class banned away from them, right up at the top there. But for Austria, it's a little bit of a different deck list, I believe, in the big Druid, as opposed to the more well-represented Malagos Druid. So I guess they're afraid of some of the more aggressive strategies, I suppose, that could shut it down. But even then, from Mexico, we see they don't have the most aggressive lineup out of all of the teams here. They have the big Spell Mage. They don't even have Odd Rogue. They have Kingsbane Rogue.
Well, we've seen a little bit of Kingsbane Rogue already this week. We saw some yesterday. I think China were playing one yesterday.
Yes, they were.
And we've seen a couple more throughout this tournament. But let's see how these matches fall into place. Picks and bans done. Blind pick later. Then we have, Sebastian Joe and Ariador starting off this series, and it's going to be the Odd Rogue versus the Big Spell Mage. Now, to me, Derek, this is a little bit of a favorite for the Odd Rogue, as the repetitive damage at the start of the game is difficult for the Mage to keep up with.
It can definitely go that way. There are those really difficult snowball starts that the Odd Rogue can get off to, which Mage just does not have the answers to, because obviously the downside of running no spells in your deck that cost less than 5 is you're just very unreactive in the early turns. You're not going to be in a position where you can deal with a Hench Clan Thug, or you can't clear off a board, so they can always go for a Fungal Mancer in a timely fashion as well. But having said that, if the game does go on any decent length at all, it can become very scary for the Rogue indeed, because just one Arcane Artificer can turn the tide drastically.
Now, Team Mexico, we see them playing together again there. I believe last week they were playing on the final day, and Softal and I had the joy of casting them. All of the players, apart from Empanizado, played together, and there were some pretty interesting reactions. If you watched the community show on Monday, you may have seen a player just jumping across the screen in glee when they won a game there. So looking forward to seeing what Mexico have got for us here.
Yeah, and I think that the player that we saw diving off of his bed in glee, was actually Ariador, which is the player that me and Lorinda have had the pleasure of casting at Copa America, which is one of the tournaments that is doing a fantastic job of bringing to light some of these Latin American players who maybe aren't getting the recognition they deserve. And, you know, Ariador did not do particularly fantastically in that tournament, did not take the victory. But he was one of the newer players in there, hadn't experienced all too many tournaments so far, and was just saying in his player packet he just wanted to give it a go, make a little bit more of a name for himself. And clearly he's done exactly that with getting the community to vote him into his Global Games team.
Yeah, looking very straight-faced here though. Whereas last week Mexico were all energy in the 0 and 2 bracket, they have everything to play for. It's a very important series.
It is indeed, and they're off to a respectable start here, with both Doomsayer and Gluttonous Ooze right out of the gate, some of the best anti-aggro cards, just to shut down any kind of a cold blood start that Sebastian Joe could be getting off to on the Odd Rogue. And then to follow up, even if there is some kind of a large board being made by Austria, they've got that Dragon's Fury to shut that down as well.
I'm already looking at this Vicious Fledgling and wondering if there's some way Austria can get that to stick or get that to beat the Doomsayer. Mole into Hero Power into Fledgling. No, the Doomsayer does just beat that. So you're right, Mexico's start does shut down Austria's start, and with the board clears for the mid-game there, both Dragon's Furies now present in the hand. And Gluttonous Ooze as well, got to point that out. Big counter to the Odd Rogue in the early game. It's actually going to be difficult for Sebastian to get a foot in the door.
It will be indeed, but Ariador may not necessarily play this hand in the optimal way to what Austria actually has, because there's a lot of cards they could have that would make Mexico play very differently. For example, if they had a Hench Clan Thug in hand and go Dagger on turn 2, you kind of want to get rid of that Dagger as quickly as possible, even more than playing a Doomsayer potentially, because it just makes their next turn so awkward. They don't want to play a 3-3 Hench Clan Thug into your Gluttonous Ooze. So here's Sebastian Joe attacking in, kind of de-incentivizes Ariador to go for the Gluttonous Ooze whatsoever, and therefore going for the much more standard, safer play of just throwing down the Doomsayer is what it looks like.
And the attacking in is also correct there if the Doomsayer does come out, right? Because Sebastian actually has a reason to use his mana and refresh that hero power whilst putting in as much damage as possible. It's about as good as a start Austria could have had when faced with this start from Mexico, which was just made to shut down the Rogue.
And looking here, not quite enough damage to kill off this Doomsayer. If it had been double Firefly on the previous turn, there would actually be enough damage now to take out this Doomsayer, which, oh no, I suppose the deck hand wasn't in hand there, so that's not really a consideration to go for, because they would have to rely on exactly a top decker's deck hand. But if that had been in hand, I would have been very unsurprised from Sebastian Joe to have seen that come down instead to fight back against it.
I guess a Cold Blood or something would have done it instead. There were a few options, but...
If it was Cold Blood, they could kill it off anyway though, right?
Ah, yeah.
Oh, they wouldn't have an activator, my mistake.
Yeah. And now the 3-3 body of the Gluttonous Ooze is just awkward to deal with. Deck hand plus hero power to deal with it, and then develop a 1-1.
Yeah.
Ugh, doesn't look good. But there doesn't seem to be a safe way of getting that Vicious Fledgling down.
I think you very possibly ignore it for the moment and try to set up a Fungal Mancer. Like, you don't have to clear it off right now. And what is your next turn going to be? If you have a Dagger equipped, I guess it could be Captain Greenskin, but that's not a particularly aggressive play. So I wouldn't be that surprised to just see the Gluttonous Ooze left up and try to develop a Fungal Mancer on the following turn and pray that they don't have a Dragon's Fury. But at the same time, if Sebastian Joe does want to take this a little bit further into the game, go a little bit longer and go for a slightly higher value line of play, throwing out all your 1-drops here is just a little bit too all-in.
Trying to force a bad trade from the Gluttonous Ooze there, okay. Unfortunately for Austria, this Arcane Keysmith seems perfect to drop down this turn. 4 mana, yeah, okay, it's not a great body, but getting a relatively random secret causing Austria to have to play around everything. When they're already not as ahead on the board as they'd like to be, playing around the secret will be awkward. I mean, Spellbender eats up a Cold Blood later on at some point.
These are really not very good secrets, though. Like,
They're not, no.
You don't want to have cards from your opponent in your hand. It's not bad, but it doesn't do anything, so why are you playing it? Mirror Entity is likely just to get you some kind of a smallish minion. Maybe if you can get a Captain Greenskin, a Vicious Fledgling, a King Mukla, something like that is worth considering a little bit more. As now Austria can test the vast majority of secrets actually on this turn by playing a 1-drop. Obviously, you can test for Explosive Runes, Mirror Entity, and the Frozen Clone. Attack to the face with the 1-2 to test for Vaporize and Ice Barrier. And then Coldblood can test for Counterspell and Spellbender. So every single secret can be accounted for in this 1/5 mana turn. That is, however, if they want to go for that line of play.
Honestly, just dropping Captain Greenskin might be tempting. The downside there would be if it's Mirror Entity.
Sure.
So many options.
But dropping the Captain would mean you could swing in the weapon, deal with the minions, still have a charge left.
It's pretty bad, though, if it's either Explosive Runes or Mirror Entity.
Yeah.
Choose soon.
Yeah, I think I like this more. Like, just if it is any of the minion copy cards or minion activated secrets, you really want to play a cheaper card here.
Yep, and now that Sebastian Joe knows there's no secret left, he can go all in with everything else that he wants to. Vicious Fledgling comes down, going to do the best that he can to protect it, but unfortunately the best is not going to be good enough, as now Voodoo Doll's picked up if Mexico just want to deal with the Fledgling by pinging the Voodoo Doll. They do have Dragon's Fury if they want to go all in and just deal with everything now.
They've also got Blizzard. Plenty of options available on this turn. Coin Blizzard into trading off looks pretty decent to me. On the following turn, you could just go Skulking Geist if they don't go all too aggressive on the board. Dragon's Fury could be good a little bit later on to deal with some kind of a Cobalt Scalebane board that is a little bit too big for Blizzard. But even having said that, why do you even need to utilize the coin here when you can just clear off the whole board anyway? This looks pretty good to me.
Hench Clan, a pretty nice pickup.
Just any kind of threat here for Austria is what they need, because they clearly haven't run away with the early game. But because of their lines of play of not going all in with their 1-drops early on, there have clearly been positives and negatives from that so far. The upside is obviously they have plenty more cards in hand. This is not a game-losingly poor hand at the moment. They can start to make something happen here. But the downside is they have not made aggressive plays onto the board. Fungalmancer still has not been able to hit 2 targets throughout the entire game.
No, there's still plenty of time, though, as the Skulking Geist coming down would tear the Coldblood out of Austria's hand, which is a problem. However, next turn, Austria would be able to go South Sea Deckhand plus Fungalmancer and actually get that big aggressive push that they need to. Mexico have to consider the need to remove this Hench Clan Thug and reduce any opportunity for Fungalmancer to get some value. They've not done it, though, and this is going to be Austria's biggest chance to push some damage as they draw the second South Sea Deckhand. So what are we looking at here, Derek? Do you think 1 Deckhand, Fungalmancer, then push everything to the face?
I'm looking at maybe 2 deckhands here. Like, you want to not necessarily put all your eggs into the 1 basket of Hench Clan Thug by buffing it up even more, because then obviously if you're met with a Polymorph, Meteor, or Voodoo Doll, you're quite sad. But at the same time, if you go super wide on the board with many similar-sized minions, you're more vulnerable to Flame Strike, Blizzard, and Dragon's Fury. So it's really just Austria picking their poison here as to what they would rather be vulnerable to.
They are capable of pushing a lot of damage in the meantime, though. The Dagger Swing first would buff the Hench Clan, the Fungalmancer buffs things even more, so it does put Ariador on the clock a little bit there. Suddenly cards like Leroy Jenkins become all the more threatening.
Yeah.
Though I guess with both Coldbloods ripped out of the deck and hand by Skulking Geist, the threat's not quite as bad, but Mexico do need to get out of this situation and fast. But as you said, all of the AoEs do the job here. The Skulking Geist just needs to trade into the Hench Clan first, and then Flame Strike does it. Blizzard stalls it, that's fine too. Dragon's Fury would do the trick also.
Yeah. There's just so much good stuff you can do on this turn. Artificer Blizzard looks pretty good to me. Just stall the board, Flame Strike on the next turn.
Yeah.
That does have the downside of kind of mandating your play on the next turn. Like, you have to go for some kind of an AoE board clear, be it through Flame Strike or Dragon's Fury, because they would still obviously have a very threatening board. But any kind of play, basically, in my opinion, that involves an Arcane Artificer to protect against the power of Leroy Deckhand hero power feels like a great play to me.
Yeah, I've just double-checked the deck list as well. There are no silences in Austria's decks. They can't play around freeze or anything like that. So it doesn't really matter what Mexico choose to do.
Yeah.
Opting to go with the deckhand rather than the Artificer here, that's fine as well. It also protects from the Leroy plus deckhand plus dagger. Obviously, dagger and the deckhand would deal with the taunt, and then Leroy is only pushing 6.
This does, however, not stick an Arcane Artificer on the board. Obviously, their thinking here is that they can stick an Arcane Artificer behind this taunt, which will obviously be more efficient because then it cannot be cleared off by the dagger. So I guess that makes a lot of sense because, as you said, they do not die on this turn. The downside of this play, as I see it, however, is that they've used their second Dragon's Fury, which is a very, very powerful card from here on in, I find. If they were to find, as I mentioned earlier, a Cobalt Scalebane, another Fungal Mancer, it could still be a pretty threatening board left behind by Sebastian Joe. But even then, you've still got a Blizzard, you've got a Flame Strike, you've got a Voodoo Doll. How vulnerable actually are you?
Ariador, yeah, he's in a completely safe position here, but I do keep thinking back to that turn where they just played the Skulking Geist rather than removing the Hench Clan Thug. I mean, yeah, they could have just removed the Hench Clan Thug with the Voodoo Doll, and it did allow Austria to push quite a lot of damage. Doesn't seem to have mattered too much, but it's just something that I can't stop thinking about as Austria's power seems to have gone out there.
I think that was probably Sebastian Joe's mum turning the lights out.
But yeah, all of that being said, it just doesn't matter because Ariador now has 2 taunts up. Again, as you said, he'll be able to protect the Arcane Artificer behind these taunts. And at least gain 7 armor, and that should be all Ariador needs to win this one.
Yep, just putting themselves in a position where still they cannot die in the immediate because they have too many taunts in the way, and the amount of burst damage that Odd Rogue can do through a taunt is remarkably low in this deck, actually. It's basically just SI7 agent. The only fear for Mexico here, because they will be gaining a whole bunch of life with Arcane Artificer, is if somehow a scary enough board can be developed by Sebastian Joe.
This is just it, right? Now with the Artificer Flame Strike.
Okay.
Or Frostlit Jaina.
This is just it,
okay,
yeah.
sure. Artificer Flame Strike first, Frostlit Jaina next turn will completely secure this game for Ariador. Ariador was all smiles last week, pulling funny faces throughout the entirety of the series, taking this one a little bit more seriously by the looks of things, but it has paid off so far.
And he's got to be feeling pretty good here, as we can see with whatever he wants to go to lock this game out in his favor. On this turn, you'd probably even go for a Voodoo Doll, because they're unlikely to get a better draw than Cobalt Scalebane. So you could just go for Frostlit Jaina on the following turn. But even having said that, what are they going to do that possibly kills you? Voodoo Doll Ping makes a Water Elemental on the next turn. Sebastian Joe throws his hands up. This is it. Mexico take game 1.
It got close at points. Again, I go back to that. Now they're all smart.
Finally cracking a smile, yeah, as they play Frostlit Jaina.
Again, I go back to that Skulking Geist play and think that did allow Austria to push a little bit more damage than playing I would have felt comfortable with, but I guess Team Mexico, they established, you know, this long term, it removes any potential for Deadly Poisons and Cold Blood. We're not dying immediately, and we have the resources to clear their board after this. They felt like that was secure enough, and again, it did the work, so I can't critique that.
Yeah, I really didn't hate the play all too much from Mexico, because it had the upside, which they actually hit, of maybe destroying a Cold Blood from their opponent's hand, which is definitely something to consider. And it also had the benefit of saying, you can't necessarily just remove in this deck. You eventually need to have some kind of a threat of your own, which obviously primarily comes through Frostlit Jaina. And also you can find yourself in a situation, as finally Austria do concede, in a very, very nicely played game.
One game to Mexico in this vital fight for survival in the Hearthstone Global Games. That one game is a big difference because according to my notes, like it's sort of 50-50 now through the rest of the series in terms of who's favored. So that first one was incredibly important. Let's take a look at what game is coming up next. It's going to be Krummet on the Control Priest versus Yinus on the Cube Warlock. Now, Derek, if memory serves, because it's been a little while since I've seen this matchup, but if memory serves, the Warlock is going to want as many Doom Guards as possible here.
I would definitely agree with you there, because this is a very interesting matchup, I find, and one that I personally have had, I think, a lot of misconceptions about. Because I know that the Mind Blast Priest kind of rose to popularity at the height of Cube Lock in the Witchwood era, before the nerfs hit, hitting the Lackey and the Dark Pact, and Theo just kind of flew up to top 100 Legend when it was just Cube Locks everywhere, and I was thinking, okay, brilliant, we found the counter. This is what beats Cube Lock. They can't fight back against all the Mind Blast that the Priest is throwing down, because obviously the taunts from Void Lords don't stop that. It just goes right over the top and hits them in the face. But even then, as you start to see the game progress, Priest really struggles to fight back, as you said, against the aggression in the early game that can come from Skull or Lackeys when you hit the Doom Guards. And in the later stages of the game, Blood Reaver Gul'dan's just a better Death Knight. You just win because you heal up with Shroom Brewers, as those are mostly in the deck now, Spellstones, and of course the Siphon Soul hero power, Siphon Life.
Yeah, I mean, one ping is 3 health and 3 damage, so that's, you know, add that together, that's 6. One ping for the Priest, that's 2. And obviously they can do it several times, but it takes, you know, 3 pings in order to keep up with the Warlock every single turn. That's hard work. The Warlock can sort of stagnate in the late game if they end up with a board full of Void Lords and Void Walkers and things from Gul'dan, and that's where I said the Doom Guards come in. If they can maneuver it so that they get a bunch of Doom Guards first and that the Doom Guards are coming back from Gul'dan, it can lead to a very quick explosive finish when Gul'dan gets played, but that's not necessarily necessary, as the Warlock is even capable of winning this one in fatigue if they could hold back some of these healing cards, the Spellstones, the Dark Pacts, for example.
Yeah, that's right. As it often does when 2 control decks with Death Knights match up against each other, it's pretty heavily influenced by who can get theirs first, as I would be pretty unsurprised to see the Priest keeping theirs in the mulligan. The Warlock, maybe not quite so much, because they have such fantastic early game options, like the Skull in particular, Giants as well. Even just Doom Guards from hand is not the end of the world in that matchup. But yeah, as I was saying, when you go into fatigue, like you mentioned, having the Death Knight early on is so important.
It's going to be Krummet and Yinus up next. Again, I talk about this a lot when I'm casting the Hearthstone Global Games, Derek, but we haven't seen it all that much this week so far. It's so great seeing a team playing together and seeing them interacting, seeing them actually... Oh, there we go.
As we get a nice cheeky hoggers from Yinus.
Seeing them, like, the body language, the actual real communication, because it is easier to communicate with someone when you're actually sitting with them in real life. We experience the same thing when we cast. Like, when we cast online, you know, online jobs in the past, it can be a little bit difficult, a little bit awkward. Like,
it was awful.
Little bits of lag there preventing you from... You start talking over each other.
Yeah,
it's not a good situation to be in whatsoever.
So
but when you're in
the angry right now, so angry.
When you're in the studio together, or when you're in a home together playing Hearthstone, you don't tend to talk over each other as often.
You don't.
No.
Not quite so much.
No.
Yeah. I'm going to do it. The next thing, I'm just going to do it. All right, I guess I'm solo casting now, which makes a big difference to how it usually goes, as I believe we are just about ready to jump into this game.
I'm not going to let you.
The joke started.
Okay.
Let's do
Soul shall be mine.
Skull of Minari and Doom Guard in the opening hand. That looks exactly like what Yinus wants there.
That's what you want. However, there is obviously counterplay available to the Priest, as I take a look at the deck list for the Control Priest available to Austria. Looking for an ooze. My heart skipped a beat there as I looked on the 3-mana slot and there was no Gluttonous Ooze. Obviously, it's the Acidic Swamp Ooze taking the spot instead. So those are really the cards they're looking for to get things going. It's Shadow Reaper Anduin at the start, and also the Ooze to get things rolling as Mexico throw away the Doom Guard, giving huge respect to weapon destruction there.
Yeah, sure. In its place, they got a Mountain Giant, though, which is definitely something to be excited about. Obviously, that's a little bit weaker to Twilight Acolyte, you can see, so they kind of lose to one of the Priest cards regardless of what they do.
There's only one Ooze in the deck, though.
2 copies of Twilight Acolyte.
Well, even then, like, just ignoring Mounted Giant, like, you could still draw that by tapping a whole bunch. The benefit of having Skull into Doomguard is so extreme, like, that's so fantastic, that I think it's probably worth it. But, again, at the same time, you're going to be tapping a whole bunch anyway. The chances of finding some kind of a demon by that point is very high. And we saw in a game last week, I can't remember which of you it was casting, obviously, as I wasn't there. It was Romania playing the Q-Block, I believe, up against a Control Priest. And they just so beautifully sequenced their threats out to the point where they didn't play Skull on curve. They played the Skull into the opponent's turn 7 when they had a huge board. So if they did go for the Psychic Scream, they summoned a minion from their hand. Or I can't remember the exact way it worked out there, as it was obviously a little while ago. But it was some very nice play indeed with the Q-Block. So it's not necessarily just the easiest sequencing of threats where you just go Giant, Cube, Doomguard, Carnivorous Cube into all that nonsense.
Yeah, just considering coining out the Kobold Librarian here, that doesn't seem to make any sense.
That seems completely insane, yeah. Obviously, you're not overdrawing quite yet on the following turn.
I am also wondering about this Prince Taldaram, though. I'm wondering about the merits of playing that on the North Shore Cleric, because then if Austria get any draw with it, so does Mexico.
Yeah.
However, you're grimacing there at the fact that Austria picked up the Acidic Swamp Ooze, and then Mexico picked up the Doomguard. So the Skull into Doomguard Dream is so close, yet also so far.
Because obviously on this turn, Mexico cannot tap unless they, for some reason they want to, because they would overdraw a card. It's not like Q-Block or Even Lock where you have the hooked Reavers. So it is actually a consideration just to make yourself burn a card on purpose. But yeah, in this scenario, they either just play nothing and they will go up to 10 cards in hand, or we could see, as you mentioned, Prince Taldaram is not the craziest thing I've ever heard, or even just an Acidic Swamp Ooze to get a card on the board, start contesting this North Shore Cleric.
The problem with Taldaram here is that Austria could trade and heal, and Mexico is still going to end up milling a card then. So I think I prefer the Ooze here.
No, they don't mill a card then. They're at 8 now. They'd heal up to 9 cards, and then they draw to exactly 10.
Sorry, I thought they were at 10 now. Well, that worked out perfect.
I guess this play does make sense to an extent because the Prince Taldaram obviously is the much higher power ceiling card. Like, in its best case scenario, Taldaram is completely busted. If you copy a cube that's got Doomguards inside of it, you're probably just winning the game at that point.
It's very weak against Mass Dispel and Psychic Scream, though. That's not necessarily a strategy that Warlocks can rely on against Priests, unless they Dark Packs them immediately or something like that.
I mean, against Mass Dispel, if they Mass Dispel your 3/3 Taldaram, it just becomes the natural stats of whatever minion it copies.
Sure.
So that's not even that bad. They end up buffing it up.
Yeah, that's true.
Now after the obvious bump and heal for Austria, drawing a little bit closer to some of their better win condition cards. They're left in a scenario that players often are, where you can just play Shadow Visions because you have the mana free to do so. But at this point, they don't actually know really what they're looking for. It's usually just going to end up as a choice between Psychic Scream and Mind Blast, I find, as the defensive and offensive options available against a Warlock. And both of them are really good cards in this matchup. But again, the other choice you can make altogether is just not playing it as they opted for, because they do not know quite yet which is the better of those two cards.
But now, Janus and Team Mexico are going to start piling on the aggression here. They can drop Mountain Giant if they want to. It's only weak to Twilight Acolyte. I don't believe there's any other hard counters by turn 5 available for Austria.
Yeah, obviously no Shallower Death, as that is very unfashionable at the moment indeed.
Taking their time though. I wonder if coining out the Skull is also something they're considering here. Again, that's incredibly weak to Acidic Swamp Ooze. They give up a lot of tempo if they make that play into the Ooze.
So how does this sequence work out? If they go Mountain Giant and then they get hit with a Twilight Acolyte, there's obviously a giant minion on the board, so if they then go for Skull, they're taking a lot of damage, which is very, very bad here for them.
The advantage of going with the Skull here, I guess, is it shuts down whatever else Austria are planning on doing. If they do
Good
play
point.
the Ooze, they
Can't play Drake.
Yeah, exactly. They can't play Drake. They can't play Scale Worm and trade into the Ooze. There's no way Crummet takes the risk though, right? And just leaves the.
Oh no. I mean, anything else you can do isn't even that much better here. If they go Coin Skull, that just sets off all kinds of alarm bells. Giannis is hugging his hogger, praying that there's no ooze in his opponent's hand.
I think he's just trying to make the hogger do a little dance for Twitch chat, actually.
Must move quickly. I must consider.
Come on, I'm literally holding my breath here. Well, now I'm not because I'm talking, but I was holding my breath there.
As finally it does come down. Obviously they were just considering, where do we put this power word shield? And then on the other side here, Mexico obviously have the backup threat that they were going for originally in the Giant. But then they're probably just going to get the sad news that it's very vulnerable to the Twilight Acolyte, which is in Crummet's hand at the moment. And if we look back even further in this game to the choice of playing the Acidic Swampoos, it's worked out pretty dreadfully, if I'm perfectly honest. On turn 3, going for a Librarian and Ooze has meant that Crummet is able to draw, what, 2 cards so far? 3 cards so far? It's just turned this Cleric into a draw engine, whereas if on turn 3 they'd simply passed and then gone, again, they could have gone for the same play, either Coin Skull or Mountain Giant, they would not have given their opponent so many cards. The Priest has a full hand of cards.
Full card of hand.
Oh, shush you.
That would be impressive.
Who knows with the Boomsday experiment?
Who knows, indeed. Well, by now we probably do know, but future expansions.
Whizbang the Wonderful is kind of a card full of hands.
Yeah, I can't argue
in a
with
way,
that.
yeah. When you don't think about it, it makes perfect sense.
Well played, Derek. Well played. Something else I want to point out is something that you said earlier this game, is that there's only 1 copy of Ooze. So playing the Skull, having the Doomguard in the hand, playing it immediately, I mean, that'll be the reason they opted to do that rather than play the Giant on turn 4, because the chances of them having the Ooze was less than the chances of them having the counter to the Giant, which was the Twilight Acolyte. Unfortunately, though, partially because the Cleric was able to draw so many cards because of the Ooze that was played earlier, as you said, it didn't work out, and now Crummet is able to counter pretty much everything Jonas does for the next few turns.
And I think this might have been the real point for Mexico where things went wrong, because it's not like they played the Librarian and the Ooze and their opponent had to have something for them to punish it. They literally just had to bump in and heal for them to punish it. And Mexico clearly weren't gearing up for a Hellfire or a Defile on the following turns, because turn 4 and 5 are the most important turns in a Q block in the early game. You have to play Giant, you have to play Skull, the real power cards to swing things back in your favor. And now for Mexico, they're left in a position where their power cards have kind of disappeared. They got no Giant, they got no Skull. They might be in a position where they just have to straight up play the Doomguard from hand and pray that it survives. But there's obviously a lot that can go wrong with that straight away. They could be met with something like a Duskbreaker and a Scale Worm. They could be met with a straight up Anduin Shadow Reaper.
Depending on what's played this turn, I guess Lord Godfrey could be a consideration in the coming turn. It's unlikely that Crummet sets that up. It's something they'll be thinking about as we go into turn 7. The last turn was so frustrating for Mexico. They'd have loved to have been able to play an Ooze or something just to get that Giant back in working order. But with no Dark Pact in hand until after the life tap, it just wasn't possible. And also an 8/4 Twilight Acolyte that had to be dealt with. Wanting to save that Spellstone as well against the Mind Blast Priest with all the burst damage later on. Then again, their health is getting so low now that they may just have to use the Spellstone sooner rather than later.
That's right, but even then, because the nerfs that have hit Warlock that mostly affected it against aggro, they are still important in this matchup. Dark Pact being halved in the amount of healing it does is very important, because without Blood Reaver Gul'dan in the hand, the amount of healing they have might just not be good enough. There's an Alexstrasza there, so if they go too much higher above 15, that's just going to be an Instastrasza to bring things back down to a manageable total for the Priest. And then after that, 2 Shadow Visions, a Mind Blast already in hand. They could discover a whole bunch more. They might not even need Shadow Reaper Anduin for lethal. They could just go Alexstrasza into triple Mind Blast.
Really doesn't look like they are going to need the Shadow Reaper Anduin, actually. As Janus is really stuck for things to do here. Krummet has played around Hellfire and Lord Godfrey beautifully. You mentioned before, potentially dropping the Doomguard might be their only option. I think it is their only option here.
That's just not good, though. Like, if they play the Doomguard, it just dies on board. At which point, what was the point of playing it? Because you have to make something. You have to make something absurdly powerful happen here to have any real chance. Well, that's how you come back.
This isn't absurdly powerful, but it does allow Mexico to clear the board nicely and heal themselves back up to 21. I wasn't sure if they were going to go for the Hellfire or the Spellstone to do that, but I guess they've decided enough is enough. We need to get some health back.
Good to see, despite this game where everything that can go wrong has gone wrong for Janus, he's still having a laugh with his mates, which, I mean, it's what Hearthstone's all about, really.
Yes, and again, that's why it's such a joy to watch the team play together, as seems to be a little bit of a problem with our Discover system there, but hopefully we'll be able to tell you what those cards are soon.
There's not really all too many options left that it could be. It's obviously not a Shadow Visions, probably not going to be picking a Powered Shield.
Well,
the Mind Blast, obviously, the card that has been chosen there for Austria, and that's exactly what they're looking for here, because as we pointed out, with Alexstrasza and potentially 3 Mind Blasts in hand after the second Visions comes down,
Holy Fire, Psychic Scream, Divine Hymn. Sorry to interrupt you there, Derek.
They may just not need the Shadow Reaper Anduin.
I wasn't sure how long that was going to be on the screen, so I wanted to quickly get it while I could see it in the corner of my eye.
But Holy Fire, while it is obviously, well, in terms of pure mana efficiency, a third as good as Mind Blast, or 3 times as bad. It's a very, very rough way of looking at it. It's not quite as good, but it's still damage to face, which is exactly what Austria want at the moment. They realize they are very much in the driving seat, and they just need to close this game out now before Janus can do any kind of nonsense that Blood Reaver Gul'dan always allows you to do.
Yeah, it's unlikely that Krummet is ever going to need the healing. So Mind Blast would have just been better, but the fact that they've got Alexstrasza, Mind Blasts, Holy Fire next to, well, that's reduce health to 15 and then deal 15 damage. However, there are still the double Dark Packs for Mexico, so they're not completely out of the running just yet. And actually, dropping a Doomsayer does make an Alexstrasza turn very awkward.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
I wonder.
What does it set up for, though? I guess if you go Doomsayer, and it does happen to clear the board, then you can go Doomguard into something. I'm not even sure at that point. But then again, at the same time, if you just drop Doomsayer here, maybe they just go Alexstrasza, and then you can't go for your own kind of play that you want to make to heal back up, to develop the board, because you literally have to heal or you're dead.
So it would have to be a Godfrey plus Dark Pact or Cube plus Dark Pact or something. So yeah, gonna go with the Godfrey turn. 7 mana 4/4, clear a Wild Pyromancer. Seems a little bit overcosted.
And in this scenario, I actually love this from Austria, just going for the Alexstrasza, which you nearly always want to save to go after the Shadow Reaper Anduin. But this makes what I was talking about earlier on in the day, this 2-pronged attack. You have the damage in hand to close out the game instantly, so they have to heal whether they know it or not. You also have this 8/8 Alexstrasza itself on the board, which they have to clear. And there's just no way they can do that.
Yeah, I mean, they can clear it with Doomguard Hellfire, but or just Doomguard, and then they can't Dark Pact anything if they're trading both minions in.
So what, they'd go Hellfire, Dark Pact their own guy, and then play Doomguard.
That's too much mana. That costs 10. They have 9.
Oh, they do have 9. You're right, yeah. Yeah.
There's just they're doing a lot of counting at the moment, but I really don't think there's any way out of this.
Yeah, there's just nothing here.
Start with a tap. Not sure what's in the deck that helps though.
As they're pretty much coming to the realization that Austria just had them here. And while we talked about some of the things that maybe Mexico could have done a little bit better in this series to slow down the draw of their opponent, even before the Northshire Cleric did its thing, Austria had every answer they needed.
They could have actually dealt with like Dark Pax the Doomsayer there and healed
That's
out
true.
of 15 damage range, but I guess...
Is that a winning situation?
Exactly. It's the same thing that we were talking about earlier with the Divine Hymn. It's like, yes, we could do that. We could use every little bit of healing and all of our resources right now, but it's not going to win us the game. It's just going to allow us to survive as Krummet takes this unfavored matchup for the Control Priest. Not a huge favorite for the Warlock, but, you know, slight favorite. And we're going to move forwards to game number 3 on a 1-1 score. Things have evened up pretty nicely.
They have indeed. And like you said, it's not a massive favorite for the Warlock, but if you look at that game, if either Ooze or the Twilight Acolyte had not been there, that would have looked really, really scary for the Priest indeed. Huge amounts of damage attacking through to face, 2 cubes in hand, a couple of Dark Packs as well. We have seen throughout the last few months, or feels like forever now, of Hearthstone, what Q-Block can do. It's a truly disgustingly powerful deck when you don't disrupt its cards.
All right, well, if you've been watching the Hearthstone Global Games up until now, you'll know that with a 1-1 score, that means we're going to go to a very short break. So go check out the Play Hearthstone Facebook page, peruse through the many new Boomsday cards that have appeared there, and we'll see you again in a few more minutes. Welcome back. It's Austria versus Mexico fighting for their life in the Hearthstone Global Games. Current score is 1-1. Everything to play for as we move forward to the next game, which is going to be Even Warlock for Austria versus Odd Paladin for Mexico. Talk me through this matchup, Derek.
This is one that we were actually going to get to see as the ace match earlier on today between Italy and Spain. And it's one of the reasons why we were saying that Spain was so favoured, because the Even Warlock up against the Odd Paladin is a very nice matchup, I find, for the Even Warlock. You find yourself with so many very powerful board clears, which we know Odd Paladin is always weak to, obviously, primarily in the form of Defile, which is just your absolute trump card in the matchup, but also in the forms of Hellfire. But where it kind of diverges from Q-Block is the fact that you don't only have those powerful board clears, you also have some good early game options. If you just throw down a Vulgar Homunculus on turn 2, that's probably just going to contest board for a little while. Yep. You also have often Plated Beetle, as well as a Sun Fury Protector, just some stuff you can throw down onto the board, try and wrestle back board control before you go for your real power turns with stuff like Twilight Drake and Mountain Giant.
And Hooked Reavers even later on for more taunts to defend themselves as we jump into the game. It's very difficult to play around Defile in a deck that is focused around summoning 2 copies of a 1-1 every single turn. However, to counter that, Odd Paladin is very good at restocking the board after it's been cleared over and over again. So it's definitely not a runaway victory for the Even Warlock. The Paladin can have a shot here.
It can, but that's a pretty nice hand to be getting along with for Austria. Yeah. Even just the Defile and Hellfire. Acidic Swamp Ooze is also not that bad. If you can get rid of a Maul early on, that's a pretty nice tempo swing back in your favor. But obviously, the primary card that you want to save that for is the Vine Cleaver, which can just be so devastatingly powerful in any matchup, as Colitis on the Odd Paladin throws away his Stonehill Defender and is met with the big old patchy boy himself, Baku the Moon Eater, which you just never ever want to see with this deck.
We have turned our curse into
I had to spice up that meme a little bit. It's getting very old at this point.
It's just become the pro player way of talking about cards now. Is that if you don't want to draw it and you draw it, it's patches.
It's patches. It's like when my weird granny sends me a Christmas card that I don't want. It's like, oh, this card's patches.
Dude, why don't you want your grand's Christmas card? What's wrong with you?
It was a joke. I love you both, grannies.
It's very mean.
Okay, they can edit that out in post.
Ah, sure. I hear that that's the done thing nowadays. Well, it's turn 2. Okay, so it's not as straightforward as just hero power every turn, though, is it? Because Flame Elemental plus Diamond would play around Defile. It would prevent Austria from easily clearing up this board. Then again, if they do hero power and Defile does get played, do they care that much?
Yeah, this is definitely a hero power turn. I like the thinking there, that you can make your board a little bit more resilient. But if you look at what this hand can actually do, you definitely need the value here. Like, Flame Elemental Diamol is more invulnerable in the immediate to Defile, but you're making yourself more vulnerable to Hellfire on a later date as well. You're still vulnerable to something like a Vulgar Homunculus. I really don't like this play from Mexico. I just find here, like, what does their hand do? If they're met with a Hellfire, a Vulgar Homunculus, even like a Twilight Drake or something, they just do not have that ability, as you mentioned, to consistently repopulate the board, because 2 1/1s each turn is good, but it's not good enough.
Well, what they're thinking is that with this board unable to be cleared by Austria, they can follow up with the raid leader and start to deal some serious damage as Chile take the first win against Slovakia there. Their score is currently 1-1 in the Swiss. So not quite as gut-wrenching as this series we're watching now, but still important.
So many possibilities.
But in this scenario, if you're met with a Vulgar Homunculus, say, you go raid leader, you trade in your Diamol and one of your guys.
And then you die to Defile.
You still die to Defile,
so
you're still vulnerable to Hellfire. Whereas if you've gone hero power on the last turn, and then you're met with something like a raid leader or a plated beetle or a Sun Fury Protector, you can then still play raid leader if you have to, and just trade away your 1/1s.
Handle it!
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if they're met with the Homunculus, they'd have probably had to trade in both of the Flame Elementals rather than the Diamol, just to continue to play around the Defile. Yes, that's what they were doing the first turn, like they follow the same logic. However, now Coin Hellfire is a possibility for Zandy, and as you mentioned a moment ago, Kalitis is going to really struggle to restock on this board.
Here for Austria, obviously they don't really want to just throw down a Hellfire on a board such as this one because you want to save it for level up. But with the way Mexico have been playing, I think you can be pretty sure level up is not in hand at the moment.
Yeah, that's true. We tend to see a lot more 1/1s if a team is trying to set up for that play. Is there any merit to Zandy just dropping Mountain Giant here? It seems like he'd be taking a lot of damage if he did that. A second raid leader, for example, would be 12 damage to the face.
Or even just this, going down to 11 is pretty scary. If you then go Hellfire, you don't have that much healing in hand. I don't really think you need to be honest. Because if you go Coin Hellfire on this turn, they can't level up for another turn. So anything they develop that involves dudes, or involves Silverhand Recruits, sorry, will be vulnerable to Hellfire. It just has to be because they have 1 health.
God, I agree with John, just that a little bit too late there. If that could be played now for 0 mana, that would be an okay way of starting the restock process. But nope, it's going to have to be hero power double Firefly, or Firefly Flame Elemental rather.
And now they start to fit in the hero powers a little bit later on, and they are left with no 1-drops left in hand whatsoever. They haven't done that much damage. Well, I suppose they've done a little bit more than they would have done, but so what? Even Warlock can always heal up. And their hand just does nothing. It's not high value enough at all to win this game.
Austria just trying to work out how they can completely secure this one. There's actually a few good options here. They could just play the Defile, follow up with the Homunculus.
Yeah,
they could go with both 2 mana taunts. Or they could just drop Mountain Giant. Like, there's only 4 damage on the board at the moment. There's only so high the attack of these minions can actually go. Maybe taking the aggressive route here isn't such a bad idea.
I think then you'd start to be a little bit afraid of, you know, level up or Leroy nonsense, stuff like that. Maybe even a Vine Cleaver. Although I suppose you do have the Acidic Swampus.
Purifier's Maul, I guess, would be or the Divine Shield Maul would be the bad one.
That's a good point. And so just playing it safe here with something like Defile Homunculus really doesn't feel that bad, but in the end they are going for the Mountain Giant here. Like you said, they're not taking all too much damage quite yet, and they do, I suppose, always have the possibility from here on in of 2 Spellstones which can be buffed up even higher by the Vulgar Homunculus.
Yeah, they can hit a bigger board with the Defile this way also. Defile and then hit the face immediately with an 8/8 seems like a very aggressive route.
Wonder.
4 damage on the board, that would add another 2, so that's 6 damage total, putting Austria down to 10. I guess cards like Leroy Jenkins can start to be a little bit scary for Austria here. Leroy Jenkins' Blessing of Might is 9 damage, so we're getting into almost close territory.
And then the problem becomes you are not able to heal up and clear on the next turn. Turn 5, you can't play Defile Spellstone, which is the one reason why I'm thinking, as you said, maybe this is a little bit too safe for Zandy. But even having said that, that's a very specific series of cards that needs to come down. Leroy would only get them down to 12 at this point anyway. They could still clear off the vast majority of the board.
Reporting for duty.
I mean, it can just be Defile Homunculus now, can't it?
But we fight.
Yeah,
That protects from Leroy Jenkins pretty well.
it does indeed. They wouldn't die to Leroy into Blessing of Might anymore. And now we are in a position where Mexico, Colitas just has nothing to do with this hand. This does not do anything until he draws a copy of Divine Favor, which I'm just looking to see if it's even in the
There
deck.
is, there's one copy.
One copy, okay. And they're going for the Stonehill plus Divine Favor version. A lot of decks are getting rid of those Stonehills for something like more Void Rippers.
Void Ripper doesn't seem as though it would do all that much for Mexico here anyway, just adding a couple attack to the board, not doing anything to Austria specifically. As Austria are looking through what their other options might be, again, Homunculus plus Stubborn Gastropod is there, but there's a lot of 1/1s on the board now that could be buffed into 3/3s, so that seems like an unnecessary risk to me. I do think the Defile is necessary this turn to clear up the board.
I agree.
And guarantee that Callistus will be hitting with a lot of damage next turn. And yeah, following up the Homunculus as we expected, this is now the safest thing that they can do to play around a high amount of burst damage.
And this isn't even one of those situations where the odd paladin can extend the game into the super late game as Leroy Jenkins is drawn, because the amount of counter pressure that the even Warlock has available to them is absolutely tremendous. They can clear off anything that's played with the Spellstones, throw down a Twilight Drake if nothing threatening comes down, and then obviously they've got that nice little tech there of Bone Mare thrown in to just really lock out this game.
Yeah, we've seen a lot more of Bone Mare in Even Warlock over the last few weeks. Sometimes it's in there instead of the Lich King. Sometimes it's in there in addition. Nowadays it seems to be in there as well
In
as
addition,
the Lich King.
yeah, I think that's
more
the most recent one that Orange, Pheno, and Ball Control took to Seat Story over the weekend, as I believe they practiced together. And you know, yeah, it does make its way into Evenlock every now and then, but I like it a lot. It's not bad against aggro, obviously, because you get the taunt, and very nice against control to just get surprise burst damage and board presence.
Move quickly.
Should probably nerf that Bone Mare so that it can't be played in Evenlock. Maybe just make it 7 mana.
Just nerf it back down to 7.
Yeah.
As now, it feels like there's very little way that Zandy can lose here after spellstoning the Corridor Creeper, probably with the more expensive, the 7 damage one, just because what do you have to hit that has more than 5 health? I guess a Tarim off of Stonehill as the most kind of out there scenario.
Yeah.
But even then, just healing up more, make sure you're locking down the board, playing something like a Stubborn Gastropod.
I mean, Tarim is pretty much the reason that people run Stonehill Defender in Odd Paladin. It's absurdly strong when they can pull it off. But again, like Zandy just has all of the possible ways to play around this now. Spellstone heals him back up to 15 health. He can clear the board with his minions if he really wants to, but sticking up a taunt, going face with the Mountain Giant seems very safe here. Sets up 2-turn lethal very nicely also.
Even with the Void Ripper picked up, absolutely nothing going to be doing here for Mexico. And I have to be honest here, I do feel like that was a pretty misplayed early game from the Odd Paladin. The fact that they, like, even if we want to go back earlier than the turn 2 hero power, their mulligan, I think they kept Firefly and Ray Leader, which is not a particularly optimistic mulligan. They didn't mulligan for the more powerful cards like Fungal Mancer and Level Up. They instead kept a 1-drop, of which you have many, many in this deck. You don't necessarily have to keep that, although it's not the worst thing in the world when you're on the play, so you have less cards to mulligan with. But even then, I just think not pressing that hero power enough just was such a mistake, because the difference between 1 and 2 health in this matchup is pretty minimal, to be honest.
So the problem with playing around the Defile from turn 2, like, as the Odd Paladin, you cannot play around Defile forever. It's just not possible. The earlier you can bait that card out, the better your late game is going to be. And the Defile was used in a very powerful way by Zandy to clear a full board of 7 threats. Had the hero power been used sooner, as you were saying, right back on turn 2, maybe it wouldn't have gone that way, but it's still a very difficult matchup for the Paladin. And as predicted, Austria do take the win with the even Warlock. They are now 2 wins to 1 loss, and things are looking a little bit shaky for Mexico. However, next up, it's going to be Big Druid versus Death Rattle Hunter. Now, this matchup... Okay, I want to say it usually goes to the Hunter. However, Oakheart can happen. Bright-Eyed Scout can happen. Things can happen in Big Druid. Now, I know that you're a bit of a Big Druid expert this month. Is that right, Derek? Way back when you hit Legend with the deck, you played it a lot earlier.
I mean, it's less I'm an expert. It's more just the one deck that's been doing anything for me this season. I was hovering around rank 1 and 2 for so long this season. I just could not seem to get that final push to get to Legend, and then inevitably Big Druid. I found out I'm pretty good at drawing Wild Growth on 2 with that deck, and yeah, it worked wonders for me.
You're also pretty good at drawing Bright-Eyed Scout into Master Oakheart, if I remember from your stream.
Yeah, I did do that 2 games in a row, which was pretty absurd indeed. But like you said, that is what Big Druid allows you to do. Any deck that functions reasonably well most of the time, and some of the time just cannot lose, has the most impossibly broken scenarios, is probably a good deck. You always want to give yourself that possibility to just win.
It's far from the favorite of Druid decks, as we've seen in the Hearthstone Global Games. Obviously, Malygos Druid is considered the big one. No, that's ironic, isn't it? Malygos Druid is considered the best deck, the best Druid deck, and then we've seen quite a bit of Token Druid as well. Haven't seen that much Taunt Druid, but Big Druid does seem to have sort of usurped Taunt Druid, as it does the same job, but potentially does it in some more unfair ways.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And you also just allow yourself to play 2 of the absolute best cards in Druid's arsenal in Spreading Plague and Malfurion the Pestilent, because they summon beasts, which messes with the Witching Hour nonsense that you try and make work with the Taunt Druid. It's still, I don't think, absolutely game over for Taunt Druid. It might find its place before, well, I suppose the Boomsday Project comes out very soon, and then all kinds of nonsense with Flipidinous Floop comes out.
You got less than a week. So
but it's still a decent deck. Maybe we'll see a little bit more from it in the upcoming ladder and tournaments. But even then, I agree. Big Druid just does such a good job against some of these decks because it runs a lot of cards that are just really good in the meta at the moment. Obviously, Master Oakheart, we know, is incredibly powerful. But even something like Tyrantus, I think for a long time, has been a very underrated card. And now that we do enter a much slower meta with a lot less aggressive decks, Tyrantus is just an incredibly good card at the moment. It demands out answers that often just aren't there.
Yeah, and funnily enough, as I just glanced at the deck lists, I almost thought we'd made a horrible mistake there. We haven't, but it turns out that Mexico's Druid is also Big Druid.
Oh, right, and it was banned as the first deck.
Yeah. So that's a little bit of a surprise. The reason I thought we'd made a mistake is I thought, oh no, I've got it the wrong way round. We've spent the last few minutes talking about Big Druid, and it's actually going to be Malygos Druid. No, it's fine. They are both Big Druids. But that's curious. I wonder why one of the teams decided to ban the Big Druid. Oh, no, sorry, it's Taunt Druid.
Oh, it's Taunt Druid.
Easy mistake to make, that one.
Misled me again.
But yeah. So Mexico's is Taunt Druid.
Right.
Austria's the one that is being played as Big Druid. So we were fine. But it's just funny that we were saying that, you know, Big Druid sort of usurped the Taunt Druid. When the Taunt Druid got banned, the Big Druid's being played.
Right.
So
yeah, I mean, the Taunt Druid kind of has different matchups. I've been in scenarios with the Taunt Druid where I've actually just outvalued the Big Druid. Even though they have bigger threats, they can't have as much consistent threats. The entire point of Big Druid is it's built around ramping up as consistently as possible, because you're obviously playing greedy sprites, and just having a clump of stuff that's so densely powerful that no deck can overcome it, because you play Master Oakheart, Volcano can't kill everything, no big mage spell can clear everything off. Whereas for the Taunt Druid, it's a little bit less explosive, a bit more consistent with what it does. But I do definitely favour the Big Druid at the moment, because I find it's not even necessarily worse against aggro, because you have more early game cards. With the Greedy Sprite and the Bright-Eyed Greedy Sprite and Bright-Eyed Scout thrown in there as well, you have more cards you're looking for off the mulligan.
Yeah. It's just also pretty crazy to me that Tyrantus just gets slammed from the hand nowadays.
Yeah.
But in Big Druid, in Malygos Druid, you just want to put that big boy on the board. If you can summon it from your deck, or recruit it rather, that's great. But 10 mana 12/12 untargetable is very difficult to clear, as it happens. That is sort of the point.
Yeah.
But yeah, against Death Rattle Hunter, as we were saying before, the problem is Death Rattle Hunter sort of consistently explodes in the mid-game, cracks open the eggs with the play deads, has the cubes, etc. So if the Big Druid doesn't do the unfair things, then I would think that Death Rattle Hunter just wins this matchup.
I would definitely agree with you as we do get into the first game, because if Phaetos on the Big Druid can hit those ramp cards, like Wild Growth, Greedy Sprite, and the Nourish that we see there, or potentially get a big card off Bright-Eyed Scout, they could just do the powerful things better. Like, if they play Master Oakheart on their turn 5 or 6, it doesn't matter if Empanizado has hit Egg into Terrascale Stalker or something, because they haven't done the Cube into Play Dead stuff quite yet.
Derek, is he playing from space?
I can think of no other possible explanation as to why there's the world behind him.
That's amazing. He even got his gaming chair up there. I didn't know they had Hearthstone in space.
Thanks, Elon Musk.
Anyways, Bright-Eyed Scout in the opening hand for Fatios is something that he's definitely going to want to be keeping alongside the Nourish. I'm already a little bit afraid of what's going to happen on turn 4.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because it's not necessarily a keep in the Bright-Eyed Scout when you already have the Nourish, because they do kind of things that aren't necessarily working together in perfect synergy, because the Bright-Eyed Scout doesn't actually gain you any mana. And if you draw something relatively powerful to play on the next turn, that means you're not playing Nourish.
Time moves quickly. I wonder.
And so I think it would not have been the most absurd thing to get rid of the Bright-Eyed Scout to look for, as we mentioned, Wild Growth or Greedy Sprite, or even Master Oakheart. Like, having that with a Nourish in hand is just incredibly powerful, because it is by far the best big card in your deck.
Dracarian Enchanter, not one of the cards that Austria want to draw at all,
Not.
though. Obviously, the dream is Oakheart into Dracarian Enchanter and Sleepy Dragon. You get 2 dragons, thanks to the combo there. It just doesn't quite work as a 3-mana 1/5 as intended. Mexico running the Loot Hoarder list of Death Rattle Hunter. It looks like it's pretty much card for card a version we've seen quite a bit of in the last week or so. Oh no, it runs Corpse Widow. Okay.
Ooh, interesting.
I've not seen a version of Death Rattle Hunter that runs both Loot Hoarder and Corpse Widow, but it makes sense, right? 5 mana 4/6, summon your Loot Hoarders for 3.
Yep. You do then have to think, how often does a situation pop about where you're playing your Corpse Widow and you haven't already played your Loot Hoarders? But it obviously makes sense in a deck that runs this many Death Rattles.
Here's the weird part, though. They've cut Savannah Highmane for it.
Ooh. Really?
now you're interested.
Yeah. So what are their beasts?
Grizzlies, Corpse Widow, King Crush.
Interesting. So, I mean, they've definitely hurt this matchup, I would say, with both no Prince Keleseth primarily, and then also no Savannah Highmanes. The actual powerful stuff they can do is going to be quite severely limited.
Yep, and unfortunately, their early game is pretty limited here as well, as failing dropping a 3-mana 3/3, they don't have anything else to do. I guess start tracking into Egg, but then things are looking really slow, because they play the Egg next turn, activate it the turn after that.
This is a pretty difficult selection, though. Void Ripper could be very powerful in this matchup. If they've got a couple of Sleepy Dragons on the board, you flip that right over, and then you're all of a sudden in a position where you can take back boards that would otherwise be completely unwinnable, also potentially in the meanwhile popping your eggs. But having said that, Carnivorous Cube is just the core of this deck against control decks, even more than the Egg. Copying Savannah Highmanes, which are not even in the deck, or 5/5 Raptors, all that kind of good stuff. So it does make sense to me that in the end they go for the Carnivorous Cube, because they kind of need to ignore what their opponent's doing here for the moment and just pray that they can do their more powerful things in the immediate.
I was wondering if they'd consider playing the Sunfury Protector there. I guess they've decided that it's in this deck for a purpose. Whether it's taunting eggs or what, I don't know. It's another tech that I haven't seen in Death Rattle Hunter before now, honestly. I guess usually Death Rattle Hunters run Keleseth, though, so it makes sense that I've not seen Sunfury Protector.
Yeah.
Austria says, yeah, here. Dracarian Enchanter. Deal with this.
Yeah, it is a very interesting anti-aggro variant, it seems, of the list. Or I shouldn't say anti-aggro, but more options against aggro. Even only running 1 copy of Tracking in this deck. This is a crazy version of the deck.
1 Tracking, 1 Grievous Bite. 1 Void Ripper,
Wow.
1 Corpse Widow, 1 Mossy Horror. That's a lot of 1-ofs. Don't forget, if you're watching and you would like to see the deck lists for yourself, you can type !deck lists and you will see every single deck list submitted to the Hearthstone Global Games this week. If you'd like to join us in our astonishment at looking through this list.
It is. I mean, it's a weird group of decks from Mexico. They've got the Kingsbane Rogue, but not even just a regular Kingsbane Rogue. One that's running Assassinate instead of Vilespine.
Explain that one to me, Twitch chat.
Shields up.
Now, okay, this turn the Sunfury Protector does go down through lack of literally anything else whatsoever to do. And now, Derek, you're the expert here. Bright Red Scout. Does it pick up Oakheart now? Is that how this works?
Yeah, this is where you... Go on, Twitch chat. Give us a little bless RNG in chat to help Austria on their path.
They did it. That's just 5-mana Sleepy Dragon.
Good job. You passed the test, Twitch chat. That's not bad at all. Just something to throw down on the following turn. Because Nourish on the following turn, it would actually be pretty good. I was going to say leading into 8 mana isn't that relevant, but you have the Lich King and you have the coin anyway to go coin Sleepy Dragon. But a turn 5 Sleepy Dragon is just such a fantastic way to start locking down that board before anything can happen from the Hunter.
Unfortunately for Fatios, there is a Hunter's Mark in the hand. Obviously, the Sleepy Dragon does bait that out. However, dealing with it very easily does sort of ruin the whole purpose of playing it on turn 5 while it can't be dealt with.
Yeah.
Then again, Mexico is still lacking anything to do whatsoever. What is going on with this hand?
This is what happens when you run 1 copy of Tracking. They do have 2 Stitch Trackers in there as well, so not a completely inconsistent version of the deck. But even having said that, it's just not coming together whatsoever. We could very possibly be looking at a Deathstalker Rexar game as they put both the enemy minions on 2 health.
I wonder what that's the setup for, thinks Fatios from his spaceship. But if Deathstalker Rexar is coming down next turn, what's the harm in playing Sleepy Dragon?
Well, it's less what's the harm of this, but what do we do afterwards? Because if you play Sleepy Dragon now, you then basically have to take a turn off completely to play Nourish on the next turn, because you want to be going 8-drop into 9-drop if you don't go for it. And that's why they're just going for the straight-up ramp on this turn to get through to their powerful plays as quick as they possibly can.
Going to try and protect the Drakari Enchanter as there is the possibility of playing that Dragon Hatcher next turn, getting both Primordial Drakes. Actually, what other big dragons do they run in this deck? Is it just Primordial Drakes? Oh no, they're only a Seraph.
Yeah, it's the very standard big druid list. Like, this is the exact one I've been playing, the one that Theo was playing a lot recently on ladder, where you run 1 copy of Spellstone, 5 dragons, and all the ramp cards that you possibly can.
I was wondering because occasionally I think they run Deathwing.
Okay. Yeah, I think Tyrantus has got the 10-mana 12/12 spot covered from his bro Deathwing.
Yeah, I mean, Spiteful Summoner was telling us that a little while ago.
And again, still for Empanizado, nothing very powerful that can be done in the immediate. But if we do see Deathstalker Rexar, the one missing piece of this puzzle could start to fall together, because they have the cube, they have the play dead, they just don't have the fodder that they need to chew up with the carnivorous cube and play dead on it. Whereas if some zombies came down, there could be some truly ridiculous stuff that could occur.
Fluffy, Snuggles, fetch!
It's finally the big stuff of the big druid falls into place for Fatios, and this does now pretty much demand an answer from Empanizado, which he does have. If we were to see Hunter's Mark into Rexar, that could be a complete board clear on this turn. Or also what was just picked up, the Mossy Horror, also looks like a pretty decent way to clear that off the board.
Yeah, I mean, they can clear this board easily enough, but it does get difficult from here for Austria, as Mexico actually going to go for Deathstalker Rexar. And I think this is the only way long-term that they're able to keep up with Fatios.
Absolutely. Because now that Rexar has been played, pretty much anything can happen, because as we've seen pretty consistently, like always when you talk about Rexar, you say, you never know what's going to happen. Crazy zombies can be found. We've realized pretty much it's Bloatbat that does the most disgusting things imaginable, especially when you have Cube and Play Dead. If you can find a poisonous Bloatbat, throw it down, play Dead on it instantly. Yeah. You just blow up the whole board. If you can cube that, you can consistently destroy everything the Druid is doing, no matter how big their board gets.
Katharina pickup's not bad. However, with King Crush in hand, that isn't going to allow Empanizado to deal with the Lich King in any way. I believe we established the only beasts are the Corpse Widows and the Witchwood Grizzlies. So, this is, along with King Crush, obviously. So, Katharina maybe doesn't quite do enough. It must be tempting to start making beasts instead. They want to deal with the Lich King somehow.
I think this is the way to go, because you have no guarantee that you'll actually get a good Zombeast for this turn, whereas even if it's nothing better than this, Katharina gets a good amount of stats on the board. On the following turn, it allows you to go Cube Play Dead on the Witchwood Grizzly, which is really not that bad at all, or just play your King Crush from hand.
What to do?
Fasius, there's so many options here. Even just playing Sleepy Dragon plus Anti-Magic Shell would create this devastating board for Mexico.
They are obviously, however, thinking, what could it possibly be inside that Katharina if we give them a Corpse Widow out of it and they go for some kind of nonsense with Cube all of a sudden?
Sure.
That could be very scary. Or if it's King Crush inside that Katharina, they just don't know at this point, so it makes their play very difficult to predict because they do have to play around every possibility.
They could naturalize Katharina and then naturalize whatever comes out of it, but that's so many
lot
resources.
of fuel.
I mean, this just has to be right at the end of the day. It's so many stats on this board. Can even clear up the Witchwood Grizzly. All of these stats also have Taunt. They can't be targeted by Hunter's Mark. There is so much to love about this play.
As now with the Corpse Widow picked up, only one beast, I believe, left in the deck to be discovered by Katharina.
Yeah, it's just the Witchwood Grizzly. So for Empanizado, that Bloatbat combo you were talking about earlier, I think that has to be picked up right now. But with only 7 mana after the hero power, Bloatbat itself costs 4. They could get a Gastropod for 2 and then play the Play Dead, so it would have been possible. Yeah. Except now it's not, because none of these cards are Bloatbat, and they're all actually pretty expensive.
That's right, but I wouldn't say that it's his only out at this point. Like, if you attack him with the Katharina, you get a Witchwood Grizzly, you have Cube double Play Dead available, which is a devastatingly powerful play onto the board. A huge amount of taunts. You can really start to pull things back. And then on the following turn, maybe you do find yourself with, as you said, a poisonous Bloatbat that you can blow up.
If both Play Deads get played here, though, then that won't be an option next turn, because
that's fair.
They need the 1-mana activator. I don't believe that there's any combination of Bloatbat plus Poison's cheap enough to play with the hero power and also with the Terror Scale.
Spreading Plague picked up is not all that bad. Could even be something like Spreading Plague Branching Paths on this turn to give yourself a nice wide board that can't even be cleared up all too efficiently, because these Witchwood Grizzlies, while incredibly powerful defensive minions, really don't help you to break through the enemy's barricades, really.
This board is just getting completely out of control on both sides.
This is like a Taunt Druid mirror or a Q-block mirror.
It is just like one of those, that's right. I mean, that cube has basically spread a plague of its own, and these are a lot bigger than the 1/5 Scarabs.
What to do?
I mean, they're bears, what do you expect?
True. If just the Spreading Plague gets played and they don't get buffed, then that Musty Horror would just deal with them immediately. And obviously Austria have to consider that. There are only 10 cards left in Empanizado's deck. So
Time waits for no one.
the potential of that being in the hand is pretty high. But he is going to go through Branching Paths as well.
Yeah, This makes a lot of sense to me. You're able to clear up a Grizzly in one fell swoop with the Lich King, and as I mentioned, these Scarabs all of a sudden become a real threat in their own right.
Oh my
Wow.
goodness. If this board doesn't get completely dealt with this turn, and with how Master Shaw,
Ooh.
Mexico can do a lot of work here. How Master Shaw, Terrascale Stalker to create more Grizzlies, then the cube gets traded in, creating even more Grizzlies.
You can end up with a lot of Grizzlies.
Timberwolf itself is also nuts here with all of these beasts that are about to be attacking with and trading in.
It's true. It's a very, very nice card indeed.
Oh, they're not so great.
Yeah, Dynamol's just cheap.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
They want the poisonous. That's a lot of mana to use up, though. Like, the 2 mana buff all of your beasts by 1 would have been pretty reasonable here.
I guess if they weren't going to use up the remaining 2 mana anyway, this makes a lot of sense. Like, if this was their play, this is the best option.
It does rush straight in and deal with the Sleepy Dragon in 1 hit, so... Not got long to do these maths, though, Empanizado.
Truly, the quickest of maths is demanded in this instance. And he does do a remarkably good job of clearing up this board.
Yeah, can't deal with everything, leaves 2 Scarabs up, but that's not so bad with the anti-magic shell.
And this is the situation that you run into as the big druid that I was highlighting earlier on. It's not a deck that actually has that much value in it. It's a deck that relies on density of threats. You play very powerful minions 1 turn after the other for a few turns, and you try to play them quicker than your opponent can deal with, because you go Wild Growth, Nourish, they're still messing about with their early turn plays, and you're dropping Master Okar, which they just can't overcome. But in this scenario, there's no threats left. Sleepy Dragon's the last big card that's available to Fatios.
Yeah, there's a Ysera in there somewhere, and I don't believe we've seen the Lich. No, of course,
Seen the Lich
Death
King.
Knight cards everywhere.
No Tyrantus yet, though.
It's very strange when you compare Big Druid to Big Priest in that respect. Big Priest of old, I mean, obviously, before Barnes rotated out, because that Spellstone allowed Big Priest minions to come back over and over again, and the Druid cards just can't quite do the same thing.
Time waits for no one.
And Hunter's value just doesn't ever stop once Deathstalker Exile gets played.
That's right.
Obviously, absurd turns like Cube Double Play Dead aren't going to happen too many times, but some of the Builder Beasts are just really powerful in their own right.
They don't need to happen too many times. Just 1 turn of 1 mana summon 2 3/12s will probably get you pretty far ahead.
Or as actually happened, it was 2 mana summon 4 3/12s.
Isn't that a Boomsday card?
What? We may have seen a very different card reveal.
I'm just saying, some of those cards look so powerful.
I mean, I don't know, Derek.
Insanely powerful.
I was watching the Hearthstone Global Games, actually.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what you were
Mate.
watching.
As again, poisonous options taken time after time here for Empanizado, trying to get some way to break through any of these big minions that the big druid could throw down.
Senku's fate.
And here for Mexico, not even wanting to throw down the Terrascale Stalker for 2 more Witchwood Grizzlies on this turn, which I've got to be honest, I find that quite surprising. Like, obviously you can save it for later on to get better value from your second cube, if you were to maybe copy, eat up King Crush with that. But there's not all that much better in this deck than a Witchwood Grizzly. The only more powerful minion in the deck than Witchwood Grizzly is literally just King Crush.
Well, and the many, many beasts you can build.
That's
here
fair,
now.
yeah. But like, if you have 2 more 3/12s on this turn, what can the Druid do? They've already played a Plague. You're all ahead if they play a Plague by a huge margin because you just Mossy Horror.
No, you're right. It is difficult to work out why they wouldn't have wanted those 3/12s on the board. Spreading Plague was the conclusion I came to, but as you said, like, they're just behind if they're Spreading Plague there.
And now Terrascale Stalker does nothing. In the immediate, at least, it does not help you win the board.
Poisonous minions definitely do, though. That 4/6 is looking insane here. That's such a good value trade.
So here you can attack in with the poisonous 6 damage plus the 8 brings you up to 14. 15 damage, I believe, available on this turn with King Crush.
Not quite there yet, so probably no real need to develop the King Crush just yet. I have no idea what the stats on that zombie star. Obviously, it deals 3 damage, though, so that's a good start.
Yeah. Well, it says Divine Shield, so I think it's a 4/4 because it was the Stone Skin Basilisk that was chosen alongside it.
And Panizardo has chosen a lot of these poisonous minions, but hey, it's made a lot of sense.
Yep.
I mean, minions like Tyrantus, which, as I said before, are very difficult to deal with. Well, Poisonous doesn't have any problem dealing with them.
And Mexico spend the full turn thinking about what they should possibly do on this turn and come to the conclusion of heckin' big dino is the way to go.
And there's the wild growth. A little bit late.
A little bit too late in this scenario.
It's not turn 2 anymore. Oh, there you go. You were right. It was the Stone Skin Basilisk.
And you doubted me. As searching for just any way to stay in this game is Fatios, but he's going to quickly realize there's pretty much nothing he can do to pull this back. Obviously, the raw power of Master Oakheart has been massively diluted by the pickup of the Enchanter, as well as a bunch of dragons. It's just not going to get the job done anymore.
Nope, you can gain all of the armor that you want, Austria, but as we predicted right at the start, unless something truly unfair happens this game, the Hunter is the favorite. Unfortunately, I don't believe even now Oakheart has actually been drawn or played yet.
Yep.
So
I do, however, love from Fatios saving the Naturalize here, realizing that his only out in this scenario is to get Hadronox off the top, and you go Hadronox Naturalize. That's how he has a chance in this game, whereas if he'd gone for the Naturalize on the King Crush, that would pretty much have been lights out, because then you have no win condition anymore. So playing to his out of his opponent not having 2 damage, and then finding Master Oakheart or Hadronox off the top. But as we clearly saw, it did not work out after a game that looked for the longest time like it was going to be going Austria's way. There just weren't the cards at the start for Mexico to get those combos rolling with cubes and high mains, because high mains aren't even in the deck. But in the end, the power of Big Druid just wasn't there. Their big turns weren't that impressive.
the anti-magic shell was pretty impressive. However, the tools were just there in the Hunter's hand to deal with it, and Poisonous, again, did a lot of work in that game. We're going to go to one last break before the end of the series. The score is 2-2. One of these teams is about to be eliminated from the Hearthstone Global Games. Come back in a few moments to find out which. It's 2-2 between Austria and Mexico, fighting for their lives in the Hearthstone Global Games, and it's not going to be an easy fight for Mexico, as the next game coming up, the next and final game of the series, is going to be Austria's Death Rattle Hunter versus Mexico's Taunt Druid.
And I think your face there perfectly sums up how awful this is. Not that you have an awful face, although... but this is not a particularly good matchup, as you mentioned, for Mexico. On the Taunt Warrior, they just do not have the ability to fight back against all the death rattle nonsense that the Egg Hunter can accrue when you're going cube with eggs and all that other kind of nonsense that you can put in there. As I think Austria have a much more standard version of the deck list, which runs very nicely against the control decks. This is looking to be pretty dreadful for Empanizardo.
There's a Pyromancer in the hand, though, so it's still not the typical... Kalaseth version of the deck. I think Pyromancers have been played with a little bit in order to give this deck a fighting chance against Paladin. Not going to help out too much against the Warrior, but there is a cube there. There is a Deathstalker Rexar there. It's going to be a tough fight for Mexico.
It is indeed. Only one Savannah High main in the deck from Austria on the Hunter, and they've got a Wing Blast thrown in there as well, which is a kind of a cool inclusion to see. But again, not playing the... as you mentioned, Kalaseth version could potentially hurt them, because you do just want to hit that early on against the control decks, buff up the stats on every single one of your minions, so they really just have no chance of fighting back.
Makes a big difference against Warrior as well. I mean, we're talking an extra proc of the Warpath in order to clear boards, for example.
Right.
That's what Kalaseth does, and that's an extra 2 mana cost.
It's an interesting keep there on Deathstalker Rexar, because I would say that's really not your primary win condition against the Taunt Warrior. You're much more relying on the power of eggs and cubes primarily. and obviously Savannah Hymen itself to just get yourself in a position where they cannot remove enough stuff each turn, and you completely dominate the board. Like, it's not even close. Whereas Deathstalker Rexar is a little bit more of a later game oriented card, just slowly accruing value rather than trying to stomp them out in the mid game.
Wow, there you go. Chile have defeated Slovakia with a very quick 3-0 sweep. We've seen a lot of that in the off-stream matches today, actually, with Netherlands beating Peru, yes, earlier on with a 3-0 sweep as well. Look, I got one win today, okay, Derek? I'm going to enjoy it.
Exactly. Obviously talking about your caster prediction, I believe.
Yes. Very into the little caster competition that we have going on.
Now from Panizardo, not the worst position to be in, can just curve out pretty decently here with a cornered sentry into shield block or straight into Saronite Chain Gang, which is kind of what you need to be doing here, I think. Just rocketing through your quest to get it completed as quick as possible, whilst also keeping yourself in a pretty decent position on the board.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a typical turn 2 for Taunt Warrior nowadays, isn't it? It's sort of like cornered sentry or go home.
Well, they could obviously hero power here, but I think they need to realize that in this matchup, it's not about how much armor you can gain, because if you're going to lose, you're going to lose by miles.
Yeah.
Like, they're not going to creep over the finish line. They're going to blast you out of the game, as we can see they're probably going to do here.
Yeah, very quick drop of the egg there as Terrascale Stalker picked up off the top, so it's very obvious what Austria are planning.
I would say not necessarily the most obvious Terrascale Stalker on the egg play, because in this matchup you can afford to be a bit greedier and go for Terrascale Stalker on the cube, which is obviously a much higher value play the majority of the time than just going for it on the egg. But as you say, like, it can only be so bad to go for Terrascale Stalker on an egg on curve.
I mean, this just curves out very nicely, doesn't it?
It does.
Like, Terrascale next turn with the tracking, Carnivorous Cube on turn 5, can summon another 5/5, and it's like ultimate protection against the many board clears that Taunt Warrior has. And that's one of the biggest problems for the Warrior in this matchup, is that they cannot clear the board really ever, because Brawl always leaves some of these Death Rattle minions alive, or rather leaves the minions that they summon alive.
That's right, you kind of have to get up to like 10 mana for double Brawl before you're even close to consistently clearing off the entire board.
Mexico really taking this game seriously, as they should be, as if they lose the game, they are eliminated from the global games. They're going to coin out the Saronite Chain Gang, take a slightly more aggressive go at it, but there's no coin in their hand anymore. That's going to be a problem in itself later.
Yeah, I guess they're wanting to get themselves in a position where they can pop the egg on the following turn, which obviously Tark Reaper would not allow them to do.
Yeah.
Does also lead them into a very nice cornered sentry warpath, I suppose, on the following turn. But even then, it's... I still feel like they'd be in a slightly better position with the cornered sentry on board here, because then all of a sudden they could just play the Tark Reaper from their hand and still have the 3 necessary attack on board in order to take out the egg.
This isn't the easiest decision, I guess. At least Shot deals with a taunt immediately, although most of the taunts are small minions now, so that's the least important, I'd argue. Sis Tracker is more value from the deck later on, but Carnivorous Cube is really a win condition against this deck.
I knew you'd get there eventually.
I did get well, I started with the worst one and wanted to end on the best one, okay?
Yes, I think it's a very easy Carnivorous Cube here. It's just the best card in this matchup, as it is with any deck with Cube. Warrior just can't kill it. And also whatever else is inside it.
Just hoping I could get there before he did.
That's why you
noticed I was speeding
and the
up.
Stitch Tracker can get any kind of minion, and the cube is the best pick.
Just speeding up more and more whilst going through those selections.
Which is obviously what you want to do in casting. You just want to beat the player to the best play every time.
Oh, exactly.
Call them a nerd.
Right. Nerd.
Got him. High five.
I mean, he's in space. That just makes him a nerd, right?
Did you just call all astronauts nerds? Because that's probably the stupidest thing you've ever said, and that is something. I mean, I guess astronauts are nerds. They have to, like, know numbers and stuff.
There's nothing wrong with being a nerd.
Yeah. There's also nothing wrong with being an astronaut, which is, like, the coolest job.
Nerds are cool. I mean, this has been the way the world is for the last few years now. We've evolved from just insulted.
We've evolved from thinking astronauts suck to realizing that they're great. It used to be that you just couldn't get, you just walk around and everyone would just be saying how much they hate those blooming astronauts.
Not quite where I was going with that, but you're not wrong.
I am wrong, I'm joking.
The sarcasm in your voice isn't wrong.
Fair enough.
The sarcasm in your voice is very right.
But here for Mexico, they find themselves in that position that we kept describing, where they just cannot clear off this board. Warpath does not even come close. Even if they're on the full 10 mana, it would not clear off the board or anything close to it. And they're now in a position where Brawl does not clear off anything of great import. They're still left with 2 5/5s knocking about on the board, and they would be met with a very swift second Carnivorous Cube indeed.
It's just a hopeless position. It's just a hopeless matchup for the Warrior here, isn't it? Like, Cornered Sentry, Dry Whisker Armorer gains them 12 armor, great. But like you said, it's gaining armor isn't going to win the Warrior the game here, because it's not like the Hunter creeps in bits of chip damage and then wins with some combo with maximum total damage in the end. It's just, they just overwhelm the board.
Right, that's exactly it.
Make it impossible for the Warrior to ever fight back. As Play Dead picks up now as well.
Yep,
Oh.
that'll probably do it, huh? Multiple options available here. We could even see... I'm just trying to think about how they absolutely solidify this against a Brawl. Because we could see something like cube on the cube, Play Dead on that cube to get more cubes. Because you always want to have something left inside the cube to play against the Brawl. But yeah, in this scenario, why not? You're getting through a whole bunch of damage. You can get Play Dead on a later date. You can just be as greedy as you want here. Start making those zombies. You're winning in the immediate very decisively, and this prolongs your benefit. You are able to stay ahead at all stages of the games because you never run out of value now.
They also traded in literally all of their weak minions in order to make the Brawl and the next Dry Whisker Armorer as weak as they possibly could. As Rexar could have done more work and they could have had some of the Raptors survive, but the Raptors are actually more of a hindrance than a help.
As on this turn for Austria, I think they may not even end up playing the hero power on the following turn, because they could just go cube on the 5/3 and then Play Dead on one of their cubes. They end up with a very powerful board. If Brawl does come down, they end up with an even more powerful Brawl board afterwards. I guess they just want to shore themselves up against Brawl into Brawl on the following turn as well. And I guess the way they do that is by making sure they have ways to refill by pressing that hero power every turn. As Fatios gets a message from Mission Control.
The gravity seems fine there, strangely enough. Just got up and walked away.
Obviously, he's wearing heavy boots, so the gravity still works.
Oh,
in space.
right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Jeez, read a book.
I feel silly now. Fledglings with charge.
Oh, yeah. That'll do it. That is one of the best combinations with the beast that's been there for a while. Never lucky, however, as they do not hit Wind Fury off of it. But even then, just something like +1/+1 feels like a great way to shore themselves up against any kind of removal with something like Warpath. I'm not even sure at this point. And just get in the damage from everything else.
Oh, cube Play Dead on fledglings that have charge. It's one terrifying thought.
That's so absurd.
Because then Empanizado plays Brawl, and Fatios ends up with another 2 vicious fledglings on the board that just haven't been dealt with. Mexico have pretty much nothing they can do this turn of merit.
Yeah, their really only chance here is Brawl into second Brawl, which Austria have played around very well here. They could have gone with a cube Play Dead turn on the last turn, which would have left them with potentially only just 5 5/5s on the board, which I say as a bad thing, would have done a huge amount of damage. But maybe then they get blown out by a second Brawl. I'm just trying to think of any way that they lose this game from here on in.
I mean, it just seems more and more unlikely as the game goes on, even in this world where Empanizado does manage to deal with everything Fatios has. Fatios can just make some more beasts and just put more new stuff on the board that hasn't even been created yet.
Yeah, if he wanted to be, you know, as safe as possible around more board clears, he could go for play dead on the cube and then cube one of the 5/5s that comes out of it. So that it doesn't have the maximum amount of power on board possible, but still ends up in a position where he's pushing forward a lot of damage and is resilient to those board clears. I reckon Emerald Reaver's probably the play here. I mean, Raptor Hatchling is pretty bad. You don't want to be summoning a beast like that from Katharina, and you don't want to draw a 1-drop from your deck.
Yeah.
Or Timberwolf as well. You are very possibly going to end up with a whole bunch of beasts on board.
Yeah, it's one less attack, but it's a lot higher potential reward.
Exactly.
Saonet Chain Gang is there to stall as well and get one step closer to completing that quest, but still a long way away from winning the game just yet. Fatio's still at 35 total health.
I mean, literally nothing is connected with his face for the entire game.
Yeah.
Not that that's the mark of necessarily a perfect game of Hearthstone, because obviously the Taunt Warrior is not trying to necessarily do all that damage at the start, but it does just demonstrate how much of a stranglehold Austria have had on this board right from the get-go. And they're making sure they're not leaving themselves vulnerable to anything here. I keep mentioning the fact that they're leaving themselves in a resilient board state, which I love. It's also worth pointing out they're not playing Candle Shot or the Harrison Jones to draw them a whole bunch of cards. Just very solid play, locking up the game.
I mean, the really stupid thing here is that it would take 5 full Die Insect hero powers to the face in order to clear Fatios up right now. And that's forgetting the fact that loads of these beasts have lifesteal and methods to heal them back up.
Yeah.
That's forgetting the fact that if a Die Insect hero power hits a minion that has Death Rattle, things can get 10 times worse for Mexico. And that's forgetting the fact they haven't even completed the quest yet.
Yeah, they're not even close to completing the quest as well. As King Crush finally hitteth the board after Austria decide they would like to secure themselves against Molten Giant that somehow made its way out of Wild. I'm not entirely sure what it was there, obviously. Just a small misplay, but it just does not matter here. Like we've said multiple times, this is not going to end with a fizzle, but a huge explosion of damage to the face. They're not going to creep over the finish line. They are going to sprint over it.
It's not a rogue deck, Derek.
Just not even going to give that a response.
You just did.
Damn it. You win this round.
Rogues won't be using Sprint anymore anyway very soon. They'll be just drawing their entire deck instead with legendary spells.
That was very cool. I did like seeing that on the reveal stream.
Which you weren't watching because you were watching this.
Good point.
Sorry, I got you back.
And still for Empanizado, really just stalling is all he's got on his side here. Execute or Saronite Chain Gang only really delay the inevitable in this scenario because Austria is only giving them a glimpse of their true power in this scenario with Terrascale Stalker still there ready to activate this egg. Another cube, a play dead. They are just toying with their opponents at this point. This is almost cruel.
Literally just hunting the warrior down with more and more beasts. What are we going to see this time?
Oh, more fledglings. We take those.
Fledgling boar, fledgling boar. I don't really see why either of the others would ever be better than this.
Yeah, me neither.
Oh, there we go. That boar was a snap pick.
I think Fatios found that one funny as well, emoting his opponent as the perfect zombies comes down once again. Can they get Wind Fury this time? Hey!
Ding, ding, ding. They didn't even look at the Snowflake and Penguin option.
Why would you?
No, you just don't.
Oh my goodness, infinite Wind Furies.
Doesn't quite work
Kappa.
like that. Yeah. No stealth, unfortunately. No untargetable does mean that it is more likely to be dealt with. However, as we can see, it's...
Yeah, even a Brawl here would still leave them dead on the following turn. Pretty much,
Unless
maybe
the
not
cube
exactly.
survived.
Yeah, all right. Okay, I guess Dry Whisker into Brawl
It's the best.
can leave them alive at the moment, but even then, Cube into play dead would pretty much lock out this game, because that's then both brawls gone.
This warrior is just scrambling for every little bit of armor they can.
I mean, it's the right thing to do. Like, you know, we're memeing around at this point a bit because it's been going on for a long while and the writing has been on the wall right from the get-go. But Empanizado should be going for every possible chance he has to win this game, as unlikely as it is.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, they've managed to avoid lethal this turn, but still, there's still a cube in the hand. There's still a play dead. Mexico have fought back valiantly, doing whatever they can in order to survive. Second play dead gets picked up for Austria. Again, they'll just start this turn by building a beast, see what they can get. More fledglings with charge, anyone?
Yeah, they do need to be a little bit careful here, because if they get careless here and go for something like cube double play dead on the Raptors, or they can then end up in a scenario where 5 warpaths would clear off those 5/5s, which is obviously a little bit scary. So cubing a bigger minion would pretty much lock out this game in their favor, and they don't even have to cube in this scenario, because with those 5/5s knocking out on the board as it is, they're still attacking through for a lot of damage, and it kind of demands a warpath from their opponent if they have it.
I wonder.
Path isn't going to clear up the 5/8.
It is not indeed, even with the Dry Whisker Armorer, which Fatios is clearing off anyway, because why not?
Yeah, no, with 2 Hunter's Marks in the hand, there's just no reason to hold on to the second one. Acolyte of Pain really not going to do that much, as you said. Warpaths pretty much have to be played this turn. Can Starlight Chain Gang allow Mexico to survive?
Nope, there's a charge minion on the board, so Cube double play dead will close out the game on the following turn, whether Mexico know it or not. And it does look to me like with this very, very favorable matchup, and Fatios clearly having a lot of fun in this game, Mexico are going to be eliminated from the Hearthstone Global Games 0-3, which has got to feel pretty dreadful indeed, joining teams such as Turkey. That's not a position you want to be in at all.
No, Turkey and the Philippines, I think, is the other team that, or one of the other teams that went that have gone 0-3 in the Swiss, and it's not great. I mean, Mexico did such a valiant job last year by actually getting through to the single elimination bracket. But alas, it wasn't meant to be with a new team, with the more competitive players across the globe for the Hearthstone Global Games, the globe that you can see in the background of Team Austria, who are now going to take the win. Cube, play dead. Fatty is having a big laugh about that, as this seals Empanizado's fate. That is the end of the series. They have done it. Austria is still very much in the tournament right now. Still got some work to do if they want to get through to the next phase, though.
I would also love it if he just turns around now and just crosses Mexico off the map. 1 down, 46 to go at that point.
What do they do to their previous opponents? They like put a little tick there, or a little like
a little sad face.
Sad face, yeah. That's right.
But like you said, this was meant to be the new and improved Austria, and they actually did a lot better last year than they've been doing this year so far. Going 1-2 is not a fantastic record, but they are still alive. They're in with a chance to get to that crucial 4-2 record that's necessary to advance through to the top 16 out of the Swiss. But they are going to have their work cut out for them, because there are teams in 1-2 bracket as well. As the way Swiss works, they will be matched up against other 1-2 teams who are very powerful. You've got USA, who just ended up at that point today, as well as some others that are very strong indeed. So it is far, far from out of the woods yet.
I mean, France is 1-2.
Sure,
USA, France, it's tough competition.
Sweden.
We could end up with USA versus France, or France versus Sweden, or something silly like that. Let's take a look again at the games that just went down, remind ourselves how the series went. And there you go, it was close. It went right down to the final straw, which was, of course, a huge favourite for Team Austria in one of, I think, maybe one of the most weighted matchups that we have in Hearthstone at the moment.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. It's just the way it goes. It's Egg Hunter, which is an anti-control deck, against a very slow control-y deck. It just always seems to get the job done, especially because there's no real kind of way to fight back against cubes as the warrior. You don't have silence and you don't have transform effects, whereas the Shadowwalk Shaman can sometimes make stuff like that happen. There's just nothing there for the warrior.
Sounds like we are going to have an interview now with Sebastian. Sebastian, congratulations to Team Austria. The first thing I want to ask you is what your prep was like coming into this week, because you guys were fighting for your life in the tournament this time.
Actually, this week, we didn't have that much time for practice because there was also the season finish.
Right.
So we just practiced about 2 days for it, and we thought we had to change our lineup because the last 2 weeks we brought the same lineup. So this time, unfortunately, OTK Mage didn't make it. So that was a bit unfortunate, but yeah, we practiced about 2 days for it. And they also brought Kingspin Rogue, which was a bit surprising. But in the end, we banned it because it was, we didn't know exactly how good it is. But yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. It's not a deck that we've seen too much of. It's just slipped in now and then. So now that your team have got your first win on the board, is this like the start of your momentum? Do you think you can go on and get through to the next phase now?
Actually, yeah. In the first match versus Romania, I felt we played pretty well, but they got some good RNG outcomes and also with the Q order. With the second match versus Switzerland, I was not that happy with our plays, but now we got better with our plays and our communication. So I hopefully we will be better in the next matches. And also I think the next match will be with the new expansion, so we can maybe get an advantage with our deck building.
Yeah, I think you played very well in that game. We liked what we saw a lot, and now that you enter the record of 1 and 2, are there any opponents that you'd really like to face or really not like to face going into the next game in a couple of weeks?
Actually, maybe some bigger teams would be cool. So some teams who have a good reputation, so we can show the other people that we are pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about some seriously powerful teams now in the 1 and 2 bracket with you. The United States, Sweden, and France, we were just talking about being some of them. How do you think the Witchwood is going to... Not the Witchwood, the other one. The
Boomsday
next one.
Project.
The Boomsday Project. How do you think the Boomsday Project is going to affect your preparation? Have you come up with a plan of who's going to do what and start to test decks and stuff?
Actually, we didn't plan anything yet because if we would have lost, yeah, we would be out. So now... So now we are all pretty hyped about the expansion because the cards which were released, they looked all pretty strong and pretty cool. So it will be, we will have to invest a lot of time for the practice because, yeah, we could get a big advantage if we have a good lineup. So yeah.
Yeah.
So we will maybe say that some people of us have to practice these type of decks and play other classes. Yeah.
Division of labor. I love to hear that. Congratulations, Sebastian. Congratulations to your team. We will see you again in a few more weeks.
Yeah, thank you.
What a time to be playing Hearthstone, Derek. The Boomsday or the Witchwood? No, the Boomsday coming out very soon. And a lot of new decks we're going to see appearing in the Hearthstone Global Games. Let's take a look back at some of the highlights of the series that we just witnessed, starting way back when in Game 1. Wow, this was a long time ago.
It was indeed, with Sebastian Joe piloting on this odd rogue. I like a lot what he was saying in the interview. It's a good attitude to have, to say you want to face down the harder opponents to prove yourself. It's kind of all or nothing for them now, isn't it, when they're down on 1 and 2?
I thought you were going to say it's a good attitude to have, to say, nah, we haven't bothered prepping for next week. We might be out right now.
That's the wrong attitude to have. But yes, this particular game, Ariador, putting on a pretty good display with the Control Mage, just very solid play, locking out his opponent from any kind of outs with Leroy or any of that nonsense, even when it was top decked as the final card of the game. But this one, for Austria on the other side, was a much more dominant display. They just had absolutely every answer they could possibly hope for.
Yeah, I've got to admit, I will be disappointed to see the back of Mexico, actually, as we move forward, because they've been a particularly emotive team, especially last week when they were pretty hyper, I'd say. It's safe to say, jumping across rooms in excitement and stuff. And it's always great to see the team spirit in the Hearthstone Global Games. We will see more of that moving forward. As there you go, there was the Defile used that we talked about all the way through that game. That Defile that maybe should have been used a little bit sooner if Kalissus allowed for it by using that hero power more. but ultimately they did lose that game. Then there was this power play with the anti-magic shell from Austria, which wasn't enough because Death Rattle Hunter just very good at beating these control-style decks.
Yeah, you're right. Just devastatingly powerful here. They realized it's not like against the Warrior, where you have to be careful about how you peter out your threats. They do have very strong removal. In this instance, against the Druid, you just throw down the strongest plays you possibly can, as quick as you possibly can, and pray that that will get you over the finish line, which it did. Whereas as we see the end of this game for Austria, this was a very patiently played game, but they realized they could just do whatever they want in this game. As long as they didn't throw down some kind of an obvious way to clear the board, there was no real way they were losing this.
Yep, they fought hard, but it wasn't good enough. Empanizado took that loss. Again, Cubes just very good against any control decks that rely on clearing the board in the slightest. That is us finished today. By us, I mean Derek and myself. There is one more game coming. Just had to clarify that there. One more game coming up, which Dan Gaskin and Lorinda will be bringing you, and it's a big one. You don't want to miss it. The current reigning champions of the Hearthstone Global Games, Czech Republic, versus Romania, both of which have a 2-0 score, winner of which will be 3-0, and very close to qualifying through to the next phase of the Hearthstone Global Games. So you don't want to miss it. We'll be right back.